Thank you for listening to Depictions Media Radio. Welcome back to Depictions Media Radio. I'm your host, Michael Clogs, and Sheila Mackelson, mental health and addictions minister for British Columbia, is making statements about the illicit drug toxicity and deaths for January 2022. January brought more tragic loss of life due to poison drug crisis in British Columbia. An unprecedented number of families, friends, communities, and care providers carry the pain and sorrow of 207 lives. People in small and large communities across the province are losing their lives because of illicit drugs, which have become increasingly toxic since the start of COVID-19. In the first months of 2020, fentanyl concentrations in illicit drug deaths between 4 and 8%. And by the end of 2021, they had increased to 24 to 28%, with a staggering increase. We have also seen significant increase in benzoyl diazepines, the effects of which cannot be reversed by naloxone. In other statements we're going to hear in a press conference with Premier John Horgan of British Columbia, that he is going to be discussing in brief to an answer to another reporter making a question about this particular crisis. And the province itself has been working hard, and a lot of drug counselors have been working hard at trying to make safe havens for those who have mental health issues and are self-medicating. Some of the problems that you're going to hear is cultural responses to this. While some cultures are more open to talking about mental health, other cultures are not so welcoming to it, and it becomes a stigma and something that should be hidden, something to be shameful, that you have a family member who would turn to drugs because of a mental health issue, because of a health issue. It would be seen as a weakness, and a weakness to the family, and that person, if they admit to it, come forward with it, or ask for treatment, they could be dissociated or shunned from their family. So there are more challenges to this problem than the drug dealers deciding, hey, I'm going to make a profit by cutting the drug of choice with something that's toxic that will kill people. More to it than law enforcement. There's cultural barriers that need to be crossed, as well as just welcoming that person into our community and say, hey, we know you have a problem. Why don't we all work on it together and fix it? So, further on, there have been some advances in reconciliation with First Nations communities, and Chief Ralph Leon shared in the Ho'okamalam language today is a good day. Today we are strong and united, and I would like to thank everyone for good work. The agreement outlines an incremental step-by-step approach to implementation, in the addition to transfer of 167 hectare parcel of Crown land along the Chelas River with an agreement will support reconciliation with the Stahlhelix people by providing $4.3 million over 5 years to support people in self-governance, restorative justice, economic initiatives, and in improving natural resources with the indigenous people having a process in that decision making. And there's going to be some changes in the BC voting system, and the Attorney General of British Columbia, David Eby, he announced amendments to part of the significant change to BC's voting process in more than 25 years, will allow Elections BC to use machines to do more quickly and more accurate count rather than paper ballots. Also they'll be using tabulators. These machines are already in use in municipal elections in BC and elsewhere in Canada. So there'll be limited hand counting and more mechanized counting to help move the election along a little bit quicker. So let's move on to our next segment with the press conference with John Horgan.
Organizations who will be calling upon to assist in the days and weeks ahead as we see potentially thousands and perhaps tens of thousands of Ukrainian citizens arriving here in British Columbia seeking refuge. Earlier this week, a conference call with the premiers across the country to talk about how we can have a coast-to-coast-to-coast response to what will become an emerging refugee crisis in Europe as a result of the invasion by Vladimir Putin of the sovereign state of Ukraine. The consequences are being seen nightly on our televisions. Having an opportunity to speak with the Ukrainian community here in British Columbia today and settlement organizations earlier in the week, we all stand ready to open our hearts and our homes to the refugees who will be coming. But there are challenges, and we were identifying issues around translation, issues around trauma counseling for the children. Women and children are likely to be the bulk of the people coming to British Columbia. And also how we as a government, immigration not a primary responsibility of the province, but of course none of that matters at times of crisis. And we wanted to be clear to the Ukrainian community and to you through the media, to all British Columbians, that there is much that needs to be done. And there are a variety of ways that you can help. We'll be standing up a 1-800 number to take calls because, quite frankly, the modestly sized Ukrainian organizations, whether they be in our major centers or in regional hubs, are overwhelmed by the generosity and good wishes of British Columbians, and we need to manage that. If you don't get a call back, if you don't get a response to your email, it's not because the need isn't there. It's because, quite frankly, the volunteers are overwhelmed. So we ask for patience from the broader public as we put together an infrastructure to accept the benevolence and generosity of British Columbians towards the good people, the courageous and gracious people of Ukraine who are enduring the most unimaginable horrors at a time when we thought that type of activity was behind us. Historic anomalies rather than a present-day threat. And the violence that's being put upon Ukraine by the Russian government is totally unacceptable. I reinforce, I believe, the view of all British Columbians that Vladimir Putin should step down, step back, and get the heck out of the Ukraine. And with that, I'll accept any questions you have through Lindsay.
Thank you, Premier. As a reminder to those on the phone line, please press *1 to enter the queue. You're limited to one question and one follow-up. We're going to start with questions in the room. I would ask that you please remove your masks so that you are audible to the mics. We'll start with Rob Buffum, CTV.
Hi, Premier. Nice to see you, Rob.
Good to see you still here, man.
That's right. I guess my first question relates to the situation with Ukrainian refugees. does the province have any idea about numbers that we might be able to accommodate? And what are some of the issues that would arise in relation to housing? Like, would Victorians be, looking to open their homes to them or ask them? Can you speak about that?
I can, and these are the big challenges, the unknowns. We don't know, first of all, how many people will be coming. Canada is the third largest population of Ukrainians on the globe. And that is because of historic waves of immigration going back to the 1800s and the settlements of the prairies, large populations in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, and here in British Columbia. The first order of business was to talk to those non-governmental organizations that are in the business of settlement, helping refugees, helping new Canadians as they come. And the message was uniform across the board, whether it was organizations on the island, in the Lower Mainland, or in the interior, is that housing is the number one challenge. We know this in our domestic activity, much less opening up our doors to newcomers. So there are a variety of tools at our disposal. Obviously, faith communities. I know the community of faith that I'm attached to, people are, renovating their basements as quickly as they can to prepare a suite, or they're emptying out rooms that have been filled with boxes to make sure there's a space for people if it's needed. And it's those small steps as well as large steps, like, for example, ski hills, who in the off-season would have vacancies on the hill. That's an opportunity. There's a number of issues around potential student housing on campuses, if that's a possibility. So we're looking at all of those eventualities. But housing is the number one issue, according to the settlement organizations. And when we talk to the Ukrainian community leaders today, that was obviously a number one concern for them as well. It's not a lack of concern or care from British Columbians. It's an inability for us to manage all of the inputs for help without having a clear understanding of who's coming. In our engagements with the federal government, and this is not a criticism, I don't want it to be misinterpreted as that, but we just don't know yet how many people will be coming. There is a sense that the European offer, the refugee and settlement offers in Europe are so inviting that many, many Ukrainians will stay on the continent so they're close to home in the hope that Vladimir Putin steps back and vacates the territory so they can go home and start the rebuilding. But if that's not the case, Canada, of course, is a desirable location for the Ukrainian community to come to because of the support systems they'd have when they arrive with community, but they don't have that support system in terms of spaces in schools, childcare spaces, access to trauma counseling. There's a long, long list of needs that we're assembling right now and preparing for. But until we know who's coming, it's really hard to pinpoint just where we're going to focus most of our attention.
Follow-up, Rob?
I do. This is a question for a colleague who's wondering, is this the last time that we will be changing our clocks?
Well, I had hoped this was the last time 3 years ago when we passed legislation. But at the time when we talked to British Columbians, we heard loud and clear, not just from the business community, but from British Columbians, that it made sense to be in line, or aligned rather, with our southern neighbors in Washington, Oregon, and California. And all three of those states have made commitments to move in that direction. Oregon and Washington have passed legislation, but they require congressional approval in Washington, D.C. to suspend the changing of clocks twice a year. The good news is that Senator Patty Murray from Washington is now co-sponsoring a bill. We're hopeful that it will pass this year, and this may well be the last time that we spring forward. And I also need to say that I take great comfort that Deadpool, Ryan Reynolds, has got a bit on the internet today expressing his contempt for clock changing. So I think if we got Deadpool on board, if we get the Congress, I think we'll be there and we can say so long to constantly changing our clocks.
Dirk Meisner, CP.
Hi, Premier. Same. Can we go back to the Ukrainian refugee situation? It sounds like the effort is going to be like grassroots, municipal, provincial, federal, even international. How do you see all that coming together?
Well, it will be all hands on deck, no question. And the good news is that it seems to me, based on the conversations I've had this week and the evidence of the outpouring of support in British Columbia and in Canada over the past number of weeks, is that we can do this. And if we've learned anything from the pandemic, it's that when we are pressed, when we are pushed into crisis, we hang together, we collaborate, we respond in a positive, collaborative way. And that's what I'm hearing in spades from the settlement community who are already quite stretched. I think it's important to remind British Columbians that those not-for-profit, non-governmental organizations that get up every day to try and find ways to make life easier for those who are coming to Canada, they are stretched to the max. We've got Syrian refugees still being processed, Afghani refugees, just in the past 2 years, on top of the largest in-migration in BC history, or going back 30 years anyway. People internationally, people from across Canada coming to British Columbia to settle puts an extraordinary pressure on our infrastructure, our schools, our hospitals, our housing stock. All of those issues need to be addressed. We're working as hard as we can to build more housing, to make sure it's appropriate housing for the needs of not just those who are already here, but those who are coming. But you're quite right. All of us pulling together is the only way we're going to be able to manage this. And the good news is that I'm seeing nothing but positive reinforcement to that very notion that as Canadians, as British Columbians, standing as one up against a violent dictator, we can help people whose lives have been turned upside down.
Follow up, Dirk?
You also said primarily it's going to be women and children. So how do you foresee that everybody being integrated into British Columbia when they come here?
Well, it's going to be a challenge, and this is, the leadership in the Ukraine has encouraged all men of a certain age to stay and fight, and the overwhelming majority are doing that. That leaves largely women and children fleeing the country in the millions, and they're going to need a place to go. And whether it's short term until such time as they can return to Ukraine, or if it's to put down roots, as so many others have in our history, an Indigenous population joined by people from around the world is what British Columbia is today and will continue to be going forward. I'm confident that we can manage these issues. This is an all-of-government approach. The Minister of Education is seized of the challenges of creating spaces for kids as they come. Translation services are critically important. But social workers, doctors, dentists, those who want to help don't need to speak Ukrainian to be helpful. We can pair you up, professionals, healthcare professionals, we can pair you up with Ukrainian-speaking citizens here to help with translation services. But there are numerous things that we need to focus on, and I believe we can do them all at once. But we need to get a number from the federal government, and they can't produce that until they have an understanding of how much of the diaspora coming out of the Ukraine is going to be absorbed in Europe, and then how much is going to be coming to Toronto and then dispersing across the country, how many are going to stop along the way, and who will be coming to British Columbia. It's just not known at this time, but we can make some assumptions, and that's why talking to the community who have eyes and ears back home is the best way for us to be well prepared. And we have to support the Ukrainian community here, who are overwhelmed by the generosity and good wishes of British Columbians, but they don't have the capacity to take all of that positive input and put it to good use. And that's where we all need to work together, and we'll continue to do that.
Going to the phone lines now, Lisa Eustace, City News.
Hi there, Premier. Just to change tack a bit and speak about the end days of where we are at with COVID, with the talk about the convoy coming here to Victoria, having plans to occupy. Obviously, we're lifting everything, don't know what they'd be protesting, but perhaps they still are. I'm just wondering where you're at on that, and if you're content with what you're seeing, the police response, plans being.
Yeah, well, I know Minister Farnworth, responsible for public safety, is engaged with law enforcement across the province, getting updated on what their expectations are. I know here in the city of Victoria, Del Manic, Chief of Police, has plans in place ready to go. There will be no occupation in Victoria based on what I've heard from Del Manic and the city of Victoria. And I would just say to these people, goodness me, get a hobby. Find something else to do with your time. We are removing restrictions at a pace that is consistent with the work we've done for the past 2 years. And 94% of adults in British Columbia are vaccinated. So we are spending an awful lot of time with a small group of people who seem to have nothing better to do with their time but to drive around in circles honking their horns. I wish they'd take some time to watch television and see the evening news about real tragedies and real disruptions in freedom that are going on in Europe right now. Give your head a shake. find a better way to take your energies and put it to positive outcomes. That's my recommendation, and I'm hopeful that some of the people who were planning to come here will take that to heart and do the right thing, find positive pursuits for your excess energy.
Follow-up, Lisa?
Yes, I'm going to try and squeeze two in here. Today we got the numbers again for the opioid deaths. 6 people a day, 4th month in a row of more, 400 people dying in a month. I'm just wondering, are we going to see the urgency, because we keep hearing a lot of things, but we're not seeing the same urgency for those number of deaths that we saw for the same kind of number of deaths or fewer in COVID-19. And I'm also wondering with COVID-19 if you're concerned at all about lawsuits from healthcare workers needing to be vaccinated.
Well, first of all, I think that it's just wrong to equate the opioid crisis with a global pandemic. The challenges of the opioid deaths and fatalities goes back 6 or 7 years. Governments have been working on that issue for a long, long time, all orders of government. We want to work on a whole host of issues. Safe supply, harm reduction, of course, is a very high priority, but we need collaboration with the federal government to make that a full reality. We need to work on prevention. We need to work on treatment and enforcement. And all of those issues take time. We have invested literally billions of dollars over the past 6 years in all of these areas, and it hasn't been effective. And my appeal to the broader community is to, in order for us to truly make progress here, we need to destigmatize drug use. We need to destigmatize mental health issues so that people will come forward and seek advice and seek help and seek counsel rather than being alone, using without wanting to alert their families, their friends, their employers. These are significant challenges that go beyond government policy. They go beyond what we can do as individuals. We need to assure people who are struggling with mental health and addictions that they're not alone and their support will be there for them. We've created more treatment spaces in the past 3 years than existed in the previous 20. These are small and modest steps, and they need to be upped to a significant level. I was pleased to see members of the legislature agreeing that we should stop trying to find partisan advantage in these questions and instead work together, and a standing committee of the legislature will work on that. But politicians gathering to deal with the details is important, but equally important is how the broader community responds to these challenges, and that is, I hope, with compassion, with empathy, and understanding that we need to destigmatize these discussions if we're going to make progress.
Next question is from Belle Puri, CBC.
Hi there, Premier. I just want to pick up on Lisa's question about the convoy. So, I mean, you're pretty clear on how you feel about it, but what's being done to make sure that it doesn't take hold like a similar one in Ottawa?
Well, I think all of us learned lessons from events in Ottawa, and I know law enforcement in Victoria, as well as across the province, is seized of the challenges of people who are set on mayhem, set on not civil and peaceful protest, but disrupting the lives of fellow citizens. And that's not going to be tolerated in British Columbia. It's certainly not going to be tolerated in Victoria, if I understand the direction that law enforcement is going here. So, again, my appeal to those who think that there's some benefit to gathering and driving in a circle and making life miserable for people, or camping here at the legislature, you're only disrupting the lives of fellow citizens. We're taking steps to address a public health crisis. You can disagree with us, you can send us letters, you can protest, but then you need to go home. That is how Canadians have historically addressed issues of disagreement. In a democratic society, that's how we need to operate. Occupations and threats of intimidation help no one. And in fact, it does a disservice to those who have valid points of view, who want to make them in the public square and see if they can get support from their fellow citizens. Disrupting the lives of your neighbors, making noise all weekend long, it doesn't help the cause, if there is one, and it certainly doesn't help with tolerance in the community, and we need tolerance now more than ever.
Belle, do you have a follow-up?
Can you expand on what lessons were learned in Ottawa that could be put to use in Victoria?
Well, I think it's pretty self-evident, Belle. I mean, law enforcement now sees what happens when you try to be polite and say, please go home. they were not met with an appropriate response. So instead, after people had dug into sub-zero temperatures, they were escorted off the premises. I know that law enforcement in Victoria, reinforced if necessary, is going to encourage people to make their point and then disperse. That's the normal course of action in civil disobedience. And I don't want to discourage anyone from making their point, but I absolutely want to discourage them from disrupting the lives of their fellow citizens. Your freedom is not greater than anyone else's. And again, turn on the TV, turn on the television, and then maybe you've got something to complain about, but I don't think so.
Next question is from Andrew McLeod, the Tyee.
Yeah, hi, Premier. Out of Cabinet this week, there was an OIC that sets out BC Hydro's return on equity going out to 2025. Why was that the way to proceed?
Well, Minister Ralston brought the issue to Cabinet. It was debated and deliberated upon. This is, in the view of Cabinet, the best way to ensure that we stabilize rates going forward in a way that allows the corporation to meet its obligations without disrupting the lives of individuals or businesses who are depending on a steady supply of clean, green energy that is modestly priced, and at a time of increased costs for gasoline, increased costs for natural gas. We felt it was important, based on the fiscal situation at BC Hydro, to take these steps, and Minister Ralston would be in a better position to explain the details to you. I'm sure he'd be happy to do that.
Andrew, do you have a follow-up?
Oh, of course. I know he's the minister. I also know you've long taken an interest in these issues. And in the past, when you have spoken about it, you've talked about protecting the independence of the BC Utilities Commission. I would ask, has your mind changed on that, and why?
Well, no, it hasn't changed, but what is also not changed, Andrew, is the responsibility of the shareholder of BC Hydro, that being the government on behalf of all British Columbians, to ensure that that steps are in place to protect and moderate potential rate increases as they're being contemplated. We're transitioning away from a two-tiered system that was brought in some years ago, never truly embraced by the community. It was seemed arbitrary and costly to some, and savings for others that may not necessarily have understood why it was they were paying less than their neighbors. So this was part about modernizing the tariff structure. And again, you're right, I do have an interest in these issues, but you'll also know that my leadership approach has been to give capable people tasks, ask them to do them, and then allow them to explain them. So I know Bruce will be more than happy to spend some time with you talking about this. Suffice it to say, from my perspective, I want to make sure that tariffs and rates are fair across the board, and that British Columbians can continue to have confidence that their publicly owned electricity utility is working for them.
We have time for one more question today. Prabjot Kalan, Omni TV.
Thank you so much, Premier. I just want to follow up the Lisa asked the question earlier about the opioid crisis. 6 years continue, and every month we see that deaths are increasing because we are unable to control the illicit drug. And I spoke to the number of people here in Surrey. If we just talk about, there is no culturally sensitive services, how much we need for that. There's only one detox center in 500,000 population in Surrey. So how we can say we are providing the more services, but it is not getting controlled? But because there is no much services actually providing, or there's no much resources for the community or cultural based.
That's a very good question, and culturally sensitive delivery of services is an issue right across the board when it comes to seniors, when it comes to addressing stigma around drug use and the opioid crisis. You're absolutely correct, but that really requires the broader community to assist government and service providers in allowing them to better explain to their neighbors and to their family members the consequences of mental health and addictions. And that's not a government responsibility per se. I absolutely hear you, and I'm not abdicating that we need to have more spaces for treatment. We need to have more education in our school system and in the broader community. But we also need to have the broader community embrace the basic principles that we need to talk about these issues as health questions, not as criminal questions, not as a deficiency in character. This is a health crisis that requires a health response. And that means making sure that the supply of drugs for those who need them is as clean as it can be. What we have seen over the past number of years and has contributed through the pandemic to the increase in fatalities is the increase of toxicity in the drug supply. Minister Malcolmson can go into great detail about the increase from a modest amount of fentanyl to a 25% fentanyl content in some of the drugs that are being apprehended because of increases in enforcement. And we need to focus on enforcement as well. It's important that the public reminds themselves that there is a group in our society that is preying on vulnerable people at the expense of their lives to profit. This is a criminal gang element that we need to stifle, and it will require all of us to call it out when we see it. We need people to come forward to law enforcement when they know criminal activity is underway. And at the same time, we need to decriminalize the possession and use of drugs. This sometimes seems inconsistent to the public, but I believe we can do both of those things at the same time. We need federal support on the decriminalization side. We need the public support on the understanding of criminal elements are at play here, and it requires a community response.
Prabhat, do you have a follow-up?
Yes, yeah. So I just speaking to some counselors, they said the safe sites are in only public spaces, like public places. They don't want to see like a lot of people going on there to get the safe, like a drug and anything. So you think in the future there will be more culturally based and private area, something these sites will be available in future or in coming days or time maybe?
Well, I can't answer directly. I'll certainly have the communications people here get back to you with information through the Minister Malcolmson's team. I don't know the state of development of culturally sensitive approaches here. I do know, as I said in my preamble, we need to up our game across the board when it comes to health delivery to be culturally sensitive, whether it be in our long-term care facilities, acute care, and in primary care as well. And keeping in mind that the opioid crisis is a health emergency, that is also very important. So in order to give you an accurate answer to your question about where we're at in Surrey and in other areas with respect to the delivery of these services, I'll get communications people to follow up with you.
That's all the time we have.
This show has been produced by Depictions Media. Please contact us at depictions.media for more information.